Released in 2013, M. Night Shyamalan's post-apocalyptic action film After Earth was widely panned by critics and moviegoers alike. The criticisms were numerous. They're also outside the purview of this video. What we need to talk about today is the thing that has haunted me ever since seeing the movie: the After Earth space accents.
Ursa D. Camels, right in front of me.
What's in the cage?
Your body's filling with adrenaline right now.
Mixing with the sunlight.
Was I supposed to just come on, Dad? Was I supposed to just come on, Dad?
Language is one of the many tools that storytellers have in building fleshed out fictional worlds. So whether that's realistically using foreign languages as a plot device, using British accents for every single person in history, or creating entire fictional languages from scratch, it's a well-worn and often effective trick. After Earth is just part of a long line of fictional properties to pull this language trick out of the hat. In fact, over 100 years ago, writer, philologist, and big ol' nerd J.R.R. Tolkien was developing languages that he would eventually use to add depth to his stories. Now, back to After Earth. The sci-fi film is set 1,000 years in the future, so it makes sense that General Cypher Rage wouldn't exactly sound like the Fresh Prince. But before we get into whether the language choices they made are sound, let's establish what exactly is the After Earth space accent. First off, even though I feel absolutely insane for even making this video, I'm clearly not the only one who noticed these accents. In most reviews, this element was just thrown onto the pile of other unfortunate choices, but I feel that in their haste to ridicule, critics haven't given the language work in the film the consideration that it deserves. The After Earth accents have been described as bad British accents, a mixture of Caribbean, South African, and US Mid-Atlantic accents, and polyglot accents. I think that these descriptions are all flawed, or at least incomplete, and moreover they don't get to the heart of what the filmmakers are trying to achieve. So let's take a moment to look at some of the most prominent features of our fancy new future English. Non-rhoticity. This is the loss of the R sound in certain positions of a word or syllable, and usually this happens at what's known as the coda of a syllable, right there at the end. This is a feature that's super common in tons of English dialects.
Fire, water.
Eventuate some kind of encounter.
It must have been a survey course then, huh?
Yeah, it was. It was surveys.
Right.
You should check it out. It's a good course. It'd be a good class.
Of course that's your
Hang on a
contention.
second.
You're a first-year grad student. You just got finished reading some Marxian historian.
My boy's wicked smart.
However, artlessness is not common in the majority of American speech, and it's become less and less common in African American English. So it definitely stands out when Will Smith, who normally speaks basically general American with some African American English features, starts talking like this.
Shoots his pencil. That is near insanity, Qatar. But fear is a choice. Now return to the ship. You are not a ranger. And I'm giving you that order.
For comparison's sake, here's Will Smith talking normally.
It was just one of those beautiful moments, the four of us there at the newly opened Tyler Perry Studios, which, used to be a former Confederate Army base.
Yes.
That's been transformed into Tyler Perry Studios. So yeah, that was fantastic.
Now, given how widespread R dropping is worldwide across English dialects and across different languages, in fact, it's actually pretty plausible that in the future this feature might spread. And this is especially true if speakers of different dialects are forced together on like a spaceship or whatever. This is known as dialect leveling. Another noteworthy feature of the speech is monophthongization. Monophthongization, a process by which traditional diphthongs, or gliding vowels are reduced to non-gliding vowels. Now, this is a subject worthy of its own consideration, but here's a brief overview. Diphthongs are really two vowel sounds that occupy one syllable, and that glide from one to the other in such a way that we kind of just perceive them as a single unit. Examples in English are I, and A. Now, it's not uncommon for some English dialects to monophthongize certain vowels like these. Let's look at a couple of exampos.
State Department where you and I hang out,
Yeah,
all the time. And you like.
It was nice. Nice.
Hiya, it's Danny, and today I've been a little bit stuck. Bit of white space here so that I...
And so, as we can see, this change also has a real-world basis. And once again, in a situation of dialect leveling, as might take place in the conditions of the film's world, it's plausible. That being said, dialect leveling tends to lead to the eradication of socially or locally marked variants. In other words, since monophthongization is less common among the different dialects, you wouldn't necessarily expect it to make the cut. The last feature we'll look at is devoicing. In English, consonants generally come in two flavors, voiced and unvoiced. And for the most part, they come in neat little buddy pairs where the key distinguishing difference between a given pair is whether or not we let our vocal cords go off. So, for example, bit and pit. The key difference is in the voicing. B is essentially just a voiced P. The after space accents do something interesting by devoicing the Z sound in certain words. Let's look at some examples.
And everything slows down. Doesn't even know where to look. Fear is not real, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist.
Most guys freeze, but your knees are too weak to move.
Because really that is all that matters.
Other languages such as German and Russian devoice consonants specifically at the end of words. And you get a hint of this in the conflicting spellings for certain Russian last names. Do we use the V that's written, or do we write it with an F sound because that's kind of closer to how it's pronounced? While this process, called final obstruent devoicing, did play a role in Old English, it is not a feature of modern day dialects. Also, the devoicing in the film doesn't necessarily seem to follow a consistent pattern. Sometimes it happens at the end, sometimes inside a word, and it's hard to know whether this is intentional or simply the actors imperfectly carrying out the accent designed by the filmmakers. There is definitely a lot more to be said about voicing and devoicing in English, but let's leave it at that for now. While the individual elements of the After-Earth accent are based on sound principles, it's perhaps unlikely that English would develop in exactly the way that it's depicted in the movie. But that's not really the point, is it? The accent exists to flesh out the film's world, to make the characters seem like living, breathing, future space people, to remind you of where you are, what the setting is. And it's definitely an admirable goal, but given the film's poor critical reception, it unfortunately seems to have been unsuccessful. However, we can definitely say it was a brave choice, and at least at the end of the day, Mr. Shyamalan can hold his head up high and say,
I'm not a coward!
Bred to kill humans. Technically blind, the Ursa sees humans based on the pheromones we secrete when threatened. They literally smell our fear.
You wouldn't give any other ranger that order, and you weren't there because you never did. Because you never did. Never.